Hello and welcome. Episode 7, Ramon, of Foreign and Domestic Unfiltered.
Yes,
We're getting
sir.
through them. We're getting more relaxed too. We have a couple of Heinekens cracked open here.
Hey.
Sun is shining. Weather is sweet. Yeah. Thanks for joining us again. I hope you guys have been enjoying the conversations and the topics that we've been having here. Like I said, this is episode 7. Last week, again, just want to shout out Damani for coming on the podcast, having a chat with us about, what's going on locally and his run for city council, but also, just chopping it up with the issues that we were bringing up around the world, like we do with our typical show. So on this episode, we're going to speak a little bit about Mr. Andrew Cuomo.
Oh, finally.
That fella. He's still around.
Our favorite New York daddy.
Yeah. So that'll be our domestic issue or topic. And then from a foreign aspect, we're going to take a closer look at the AstraZeneca failed rollout stop-start that's going on in Europe at the moment, and kind of delve into kind of what the issues are and kind of what went wrong. And where the lay of the land is after everyone is kind of picking back up here on Friday. But before we do that, as always, we're going to get into some quick hits that we can touch on to kind of summarize the week in news. Ramon, are you going to lead us off with the first quick hit?
Yeah, let's kick off this week with Dianne Feinstein. Right. So on Monday, Governor Gavin Newsom was being interviewed by Joy Reid on MSNBC, and she was asking Newsom if Feinstein were to retire, would he nominate a black woman to the Senate? And he responded with, quote, "We have multiple names in mind, and the answer is yes." So this is relevant. I wanted to pick this one out of the pile of news this week because this is, if people were following back, early winter, late fall, I think you'd call that, back in October, Feinstein faced a fair amount of backlash from, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party and even a significant amount from the center over her complete hands-off approach on the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation. And, she was the head of the House Judiciary Committee at the time, or the Senate Judiciary, I apologize. So people were concerned about that. She went in very lackadaisical questioning and then famously at the end made a statement speaking on how, with getting chummy with Lindsey Graham and basically being,
She hug him?
Yeah, gave him a hug, was basically saying, how proud she was of, them being able to like come together. And it's like, and I get it. Like she might not be ideologically aligned with, the majority of the party or whatever. So who knows? Maybe she liked ACB, Amy Coney Barrett. But you have to be a little more like, again, it's the same theme we keep touching on where it's like you're getting chummy and Lindsey Graham will like reciprocate in that moment because he's like, oh yeah, go ahead. Give me a nice photo op and a soundbite of you saying how great I am while I confirm an extreme right winger to the Supreme Court. Like, cool, yeah. So anyway, so here we go. Getting deeper into it. So after that hearing, there was Chuck Schumer had a private conversation with Feinstein, urging her to step down from the chair position in the Senate Judiciary. And then we had sources in a bunch of different articles suggesting that Feinstein forgot about the conversation that she had with Schumer. So Schumer had to come back around again, this time enlisting help from Feinstein's husband to convince her to step down from the chair. So this is where we're going to roll into the next part of it, because I just kind of want to touch on like this issue of Dianne Feinstein is the oldest member of the Senate. Her term, if she serves it fully, ending in 2024, she's going to be 91.
Can she drive?
When she retires. Well, most of these people probably don't anyway.
Right.
I doubt it. But
was there a cutoff for when you can drive in the United States?
No. Is there in Ireland?
I don't know.
No.
I want to say there should be at one point.
Yeah, I've heard people say, I wouldn't support it because like I would much rather have, say you have to, don't make it something that's like ageist necessarily. Do like, oh, you have to every 30 years prove you can drive still.
Or at least,
that way it's fair. You're like, okay, I got it when I'm 16, 18, whatever. Then when I'm 38, and then it's like right there, right? Like 78 or 68. It's like, okay, if you can still go, that's cool. And then once you're past 70, it's like, all right, every 10 years we'll come check on you.
Yeah, not to railroad your point, but just like, not to be ageist either, is like there's a capacity issue that, once you get to the mid 80s.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
And yeah, no, it's fine. I completely, I agree. But so here's the interesting thing, right? So after Newsom, we'll come back to this week. After Newsom was asked these questions, him and Feinstein both tried to play it off in the media the days following. But, you guys know the angle I always try to take. What's the inside politics on it here? So the fact that he went on to Joy Reid's show and that he was asked that question and immediately had an answer, what that tells you is this is the Democratic Party as a whole exerting soft pressure on Feinstein to think about retiring. This is sort of like I don't want to call it a warning shot, but this is basically like, she's going to see this. And if she still has her mental facilities, and she's been in politics for, I don't know, 50 years now, she knows something like that. A news hit gets put on about you doing anything, whether it be, retiring, or it was something that wasn't in the news and was just a completely out of left field question by Joy Reid. This is clearly something that the party's messaging on MSNBC is sort of giving the assist in that regard. You know what I mean?
That's a pretty friendly realm for the Democratic Party anyways. So the fact that they're asking those type of questions kind of tells something as well. Wasn't Feinstein, didn't she get pretty aggro with a group of protesters in her office? Was it 1 or 2 years ago as well that people were scratching their heads about? Yeah,
it was a couple of years ago. She got upset and was just had one of those random
talking down to people.
Yeah. She had one of those random, you remember The Godfather where what's his name that plays the Godfather? I'm blanking on his name.
Marlon Brando?
No, not Brando. His son. Al Pacino. Al Pacino. Once it's like Godfather 2, where he freaks out and's and slaps his wife. That's basically what Feinstein did. She just everything was normal, and she you're from Lord of the Rings. She went full Bilbo and just went evil. Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah,
but
besides the point. Yeah,
it's besides the point. But the whole point is here. There's been a ton of other stuff too, right? So just real quick here. In November, Jane Mayer of The New Yorker published a piece that brought this issue of Dianne Feinstein's mental faculties to further scrutiny. In the article, several of her current and former staff defended her, saying she's still smarter and quicker than at least a third of other members of the Senate. But some former staffers disagreed in the article. Mayer writes, quote, "They describe Feinstein as forgetting what she said and getting upset that she can't keep up. One aide to another senator described what he called a kabuki meeting in which Feinstein's staff had to steer her through a proposed piece of legislation that she protested was, quote, just words, which make no sense, end quote. Feinstein's staff has said that sometimes she seems herself and other times unreachable. And then here's another quote from the article. The staff is in such a bad position, they have to defend her and make her seem normal." So, okay, folks, that's people who worked for her saying that to the New Yorker. Now, let's keep this in context. This is California. This isn't some vicious purple state where, Ohio or Michigan or something where she's at risk. There's a ton of political motivation to sink someone. No, this is this is arguably the safest state in the country to be a Democrat. She's been a fixture for a long time. A lot of these people are rolling the dice huge, by the way, to be even making statements like this. So that for me removes all of the is this a plot? No, it's you can see it. It's visibly true.
Right.
I don't have it in here in my notes, but I remember, when she was doing talking to Jack Dorsey when he was testifying, the Twitter CEO. She asked him what was a really good question, from her notes or whatever. He answered it. It took him about 60 seconds to answer. And she asked it back to him again, immediately. I should have pulled up the clip. But she asked it right back to him again immediately with the same cadence and tone, in practice. So it's just, again, it's super obvious that she's having issues and struggling. The fact that Schumer had to enlist her husband to try to convince her to step down, which she did from the Senate Judiciary seat.
And just on that point too, I think, as you talk about, there's been murmurs within the party about trying to, have her step aside, trying to find a way out for her that's, it still keeps her dignity intact. There's also been rumors that her husband potentially maybe seeking an ambassadorship or a diplomatic position abroad as well, which would kind of check all boxes for all parties.
Right.
Which speaks to that, right?
Right. So that's totally plausible to me. It's like you're basically holding the party hostage
Right.
by being like, oh, I'm not going to retire unless, I get to do this thing. That's totally plausible to me. I don't think that, because here's my thing. This is super embarrassing. Like, this isn't even, it's like what you said before, like leaving with dignity. That was actually something that Schumer was, paraphrased by one of those people in the article as saying, where he said that word a couple of times, where he was basically like, it seemed like he felt bad. You know what I mean? He was like, hey, let's do this with some dignity here.
I will say, she was one of the proponents of keeping the filibuster as is. She's been quoted, a ton of times in the past saying she likes it. She likes it the way it is as a way of, making sure that everything is in check, so to speak. But this week, she said she was open to reforming the Senate filibuster. Right. And that was yesterday, actually, I believe, which is a massive shift in her position because she was one of the ones, along with Joe Manchin, Sinema, who, were seen as people who wanted to keep it as is.
Right.
Which, again, we speak about it. I think the progressive wing of the party and this move now towards, changing and reforming this filibuster is really carrying some weight within the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
Anything else on her? I think we covered it, right?
No, I think that's it. We got through it pretty good there. Excellent.
So my first quick hit, and I kind of sprung this on Ramon quite late, but I was reading an article about the Israeli elections. They are next Thursday or 4 days away, maybe.
I thought they were in April.
No, they're
okay.
soon. Yeah. I want to say next week, perhaps.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah, but so there's a lot to kind of cover in this for a quick hit, but just in terms of the high level stuff with this, obviously Bibi Netanyahu, we've talked about him before on the show, super nationalistic, you could quote unquote call him far right leader.
Called an authoritarian by many in his own country.
Exactly. Kind of looming over this election are a couple of things. You have he's being about to be prosecuted in April for corruption. Mm-hmm. So that adds weight to, him obviously wanting to win and form a government and kind of have people who are going to back him with this and potentially try to get it thrown out. And then also the fact that this is the fourth election in 2 years, just on the back of them not being able to form a coalition government. Right. And Ramon can speak to more of, how they form the government and kind of, parliamentarily how it works there. But just to look at this from an Israeli standpoint, what options people have out there. Gideon Levi, who's a writer for a newspaper out there, he's kind of one of the only ones who's kind of pragmatic when it comes to Israeli politics. Well, I won't say the only one, but he's one of the leading voices on it. He says that there's 39 parties right now in this who are running for an election on it. And of those 39 parties, they're all kind of singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of, the Jewish supremacy and kind of their main topics and their main, agenda items. And most of them are, looking along the same kind of path when it comes to dealing with Palestine. And that's honestly not getting talked a lot of, is kind of what is going on in the contested areas.
Right.
And what's also very dangerous is, Bibi is already courting alliances with people who are far more extreme than him. People who hold up some, Jewish, terrorists and have pictures of them on their wall. I was reading. Like, these are the people who are leaders of the party that he's looking to form a government with. And I think just the last thing I'll kind of say on this is that if it's looking like, and the way the polling is going, that they won't be able to form a government again, so there'll be another one. Right. And it's mainly a breakdown of their whole system a little bit, and it's just, I bet Israelis are kind of bumping their head against the wall, thinking of like what needs to happen in terms for this to actually form a government. Right. What I will say as well is that in terms of the biggest issue that everybody is dealing with right now, the pandemic. Israel, I guess, his saving grace amongst all this is that they've handled at least the vaccination process really, really well. Mm-hmm. And now they're seen, I'd argue, as the gold standard for how they were able to roll it out and get their people vaccinated.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if not for nothing, we've said it before on the show, Israel's government, its actual like bureaucratic system is hyper efficient. that's definitely something that you can't take away from them. But and so just to get back to like the constitutional politics here and how the government forming works, I thought it was interesting really diving into this, right? So they have a fairly basic parliamentary system for forming a government, right? So they have 120 seats. You need 61 to form a government around. And as you referred to before, they have 39 parties. So just to put this in context for everybody, because I found this fascinating, Israel only has a population of 8.7 million people. Compare that to the state of New York, which has 19 million people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have 39 different parties within it, right? And the interesting thing about that, too, is I think a large part of the reason why you see this struggle to form a government is because there isn't really much of a presence of the left in that country. You have like the center left party, which is arguably the weakest of like the main four. And like even Netanyahu's ultra nationalist party that he's a part of, they're largely, they one of the main leaders of that party splintered off and is running against him in this race. So it adds to there's so much diffusion from the actual like main four parties that would probably have the best chance at forming some sort of a coalition. And then like, the bottom, I think the way I heard it broke down is like there's only really like 11 of those parties have significant support to really even move the needle in coalition forming. Like the other 20 something are just kind of fucking off.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. And from like the news coverage that I heard on it, that seems to be like, one of the main things that they're Israeli voters are crying out for is like they just want some sort of like stability. I think they're getting exhausted from this, continuous process now on top of BB scandals and all these other things. And
it's embarrassing for them.
Yeah, it's embarrassing a little bit, especially because, that's something that, Israel's national identity, like, democracy, that's something they talk about all the time when they associate themselves with, they love to compare themselves to other Middle Eastern countries. And they say like, oh, we're the only democracy in the Middle East. But arguable, but that is one of their main talking points. So like we were saying, I think that this is really like, if this doesn't form, you're going to continue to see a lot of political turmoil. And what's going to happen through that is obviously, we keep an eye on what's going on with the Palestinian situation there and everything. A non-forming of a government is only that problem's just going to keep getting worse and worse, because what's happening is Bibi's been coalescing power around himself more and more. So he's a prime minister. He's basically, in effect, and even people, the splinter folks from his own party that broke off the other ultra nationalists and started their own party to compete with him this round, they'll even tell you that they're not even like Bibi's just it's like him and Mossad handling all foreign policy. The rest of these other members of these different coalitions aren't even involved in government. So, and again, for a parliamentary system that's super, that's not normal. And it's certainly not what Israel's been used to. And it's
not to its benefit for sure.
No, it's definitely not. No, it's not. And it wouldn't be an issue again if it was like a system like ours. But when you have the head of state acting in that manner while the rest of the parliament kind of just isn't really doing anything. Not that they're not, they're passing policy and all that stuff, but for the very important aspects of like foreign policy and major domestic policy, it's basically him and a handful of guys.
which they play a huge role in. And for Americans as well, it's an important election to take note of because, America's special relationship with Israel. The last thing I'll say on it as well, of the 4 or 5 kind of major political parties over there, all of them are reluctant to talk about and discuss kind of the occupation in Palestine, which I think is very notable. So in terms of who wins this upcoming election, we don't really know what their stance will be on that occupation in Palestine either. Right. So those poor people there who are not only blockaded, not only minimized from actually getting things like vaccines and basic needs at times, they're also the amount of demolitions of Palestinian properties in this occupation was at its highest in 2020. So, in terms of consequences from a human rights standpoint, even with the ICC coming in and claiming there's going to be an investigation to both Hamas and Israel on this, I think the Palestinian people at the end of the day probably don't have too much interest in the actual election themselves until somebody from one of these major Israeli parties actually has a stance and is able to talk about it with solutions that are humane.
Right, right. And it's an easy thing to put in context even for us, right? Because like, we came off the heels of we entered our pandemic just like most of the rest of the world did last spring. And then like we had all the racial tension and stuff came to a head in the summer, and that blew up and was the main issue. And then look how quickly it just got swept under the rug by elections, coronavirus intensifying in the second wave. That happened all around the world.
Yep.
So that's and this is also like the Israeli voters' baseline for actually being concerned with their politicians addressing Palestinian issues is already very low. So, their main thing all of last year being the pandemic. Yeah, of course, it's not going to come up. And even like we're saying, like the furthest left party coalition which is basically just a center left, which, it's like a Pelosi Schumer type coalition. Even they aren't, they're not talking about like, oh, 2 states. They're not talking about any of that.
No.
They're not at all. And that's as far left as you're about going to get as far as any political messaging in Israel goes. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Outside of this election, his trial is set for April. So
right.
I think that the consequences of this way more on Bibi than anybody else, whether it be, the other parties or even the Israeli people. All right. So that's that. What next quick hit you got for me?
All right, so let's hop into Myanmar. We promised we were going to touch back on this. I think it was a couple weeks, maybe a few weeks ago now, actually. And it's definitely, the situation there is intensified. We've all seen, extreme levels of protest, military responding aggressively on the world stage. Now everyone can see it. Previously, when we covered this before, the military junta that took over the country's government, they cut internet access, broadcasting, all kind of stuff all over the country. So it was obviously very difficult for the rest of the world to really, have a bird's eye view of what was actually happening there. And, and not to mention, like we did mention on that episode, Myanmar is a relatively inconsequential country to begin with. So this isn't a country that like the West has any particular interest in. It's not mineral rich, all kind of stuff like that. The things that normally would attract us, like flies to honey. So what we have going on here now, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of take a deep dive into, well, not a deep dive, but a good quick hit dive into what the mechanisms of the coup actually were when it happened and why I don't see any end in sight, even with the mass uprising that's going on. So just to touch on it again, Suki, the civilian leader of the country, the president, effectively, she was removed from power after her party, won in a landslide election. And now, I want to focus on this because it's sort of interesting, right? Two countries, not too dissimilar here, Israel and Myanmar in the regard that there isn't any huge left presence. This Suki wasn't like she wasn't like, a Bernie Sanders or anyone, or even like it's not like they had like an Evo Morales or something. She was a steward of the economy. And
she was a Nobel Peace Prize winner for when she came into power there.
Right.
But since then, she's also been vilified for how she handled ethnic minorities in Myanmar itself.
Right. And we can get into that too. And I think that there's a lot of interesting underlying stuff that obviously our media doesn't really care to, again, for all the reasons we listed before. But yeah, she's a technocrat. She's like a Meghan Merkel type, I would say, in Myanmar. Which, anyone who knows
Merkel?
her. Yeah. Not a terribly, polarizing figure. Center left.
Meghan Merkel is Harry's wife.
I'm sorry. Did I say Meghan? Angela Merkel. I apologize. But yeah, so what I thought was interesting is I want to get into the Constitution. So in 2008, and previous to this point, the country was it was military rule.
Its name was Burma.
Military rule almost exclusively for its entire, second half of the 20th century existence prior to, a bunch of Cold War fuckery that when there actually was a left movement in that country. But we don't have time to get into that today. But in 2008, Myanmar ratified their constitution, which was basically written with a secret legal coup backdoor. According to the Associated Press, the announcement on military Mayawati TV, they cited Article 417 of the country's constitution, which allows the military to take over in times of emergency. The military announcer said the coronavirus crisis and the civilian government's failure to postpone the November elections were the reasons for the emergency. So again, we're just giving some context into what the military's excuse for the takeover was. So the AP continues. The military drafted the Constitution and retains power under the charter at the expense of democratic civilian rule. The Constitution also reserves key cabinet ministries and 25% of the seats in parliament for the military.
Wow.
A portion that limits the power of the civilian government and rules out amending the charter without military support. So when we talked about this before, I had no idea about this. This is a game changer when you talk about the coup from the perspective of legality.
Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. Well, yeah. And response from, meddling country, the West in general in the US, and why it's been pretty muted to this point. Now that we're seeing a little bit of violence, you hear some people talking about it. But for the most part, like, folks, this was a legal coup in that regard. And this shows, again, like when we're talking, when you just referred to, like, their handling of Rohingya Muslims, this proves right here, like, and now that we're seeing more and more reporting on it, I'm not saying Suu Kyi wasn't
blameless with it.
But it's clear here that the military ran this country the entire time for the last decade and some change. 25% of the seats in parliament, they just have in their constitution attributed to them. Like, that's insane. That this isn't even, you can't. So all of the media coverage talking about, this was never a democracy. It never was. To call it one is a farce. That's a joke. It really is. And you have the back door of, like, anytime there's an emergency, the military just gets to suspend democracy. I mean, that's frightening. That's not even. How can you expect to have any type of real democracy? We're going to have significant voter participation, or have any real change in your country in general. Like, the whole time, anytime you have any leader pop up, like, the Suu Kyi is a perfect example. She has to run the country with the specter of the military, knowing it's looming over her shoulder the entire time, that at any moment that she doesn't go along, like, and that's another thing. We don't know anything about any of this, but it's almost guaranteed that you have 25% of the seats in parliament to the military and a significant number of key cabinet positions. That means they're there all the time around her. It's like being a hostage while you're the prime minister.
Right.
I mean, it's incredible, really, that all the digging we did into this, and it took me like days to figure this out. And I was like, wow, that's it right there. There isn't really anything else to, we can talk about the protests and get into, the brutality that the military is, wielding against the civilian population, which is rising up. Suu Kyi, I'm just paraphrasing here, but when she was arrested, she's been released since, but when she was arrested, she basically said, like, don't accept this, peacefully protest, Bob. She pulled an MLK.
Yeah.
Because what are you going to do? The entire military just stepped in and said, no, never mind. That didn't count. Because, and the other relevant part I forgot to stick in here is when she ran in that November election and her party won, the military ran its own candidates and they lost. And then right after they lost, they were like, it didn't count. You should have suspended the elections because of coronavirus.
Yeah.
So they didn't make that protestation prior. It was only after they lost.
Right.
So again, this was never a democracy in the first place. I don't know why it was framed that way. That's it for me right there.
Yeah. And I think, just looking at it from an economic standpoint, because I know how heavy-handed the junta has been since, when did this start? Like February 1st. I think there's 200 people plus dead now. It's probably rising by the day.
I'm sure there's a ton of disappeared people too that are in that body count.
Right. Now, there is signs that these people are short on cash, and we were talking offline. The Economist has here that days after the coup, the central bank attempted to bring home $1 billion in holes at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, and American authorities blocked that transaction. So there is some mechanisms at place to kind of stall them a little bit. The IMF puts the government reserves of foreign currency at about 6.7 billion, and that buys them less than 5 months of imports. So what protesters have done, and I mentioned to you offline, is they've kind of have some outside of the box thinking, because one of the things that the military does over there is they brew beer. So the refrigerator shelves used to be packed with Myanmar beers are now empty. Because, like I said, the brew is made by a company that is partly owned by the army, as well as cigarettes, big mobile phone companies as well, which again speaks to, we talk about the parliament instead of 25% of the seats are involved in there. So Myanmar is essentially has always been, even under the guise of Suu Kyi, revolutionary, has always been kind of a military-led country.
Right. And just for some context here, they won that election, her party, by over 68%. So remember, the military had by default 25% of the seats for their candidates. So that means it was virtually everyone who voted against the military here. Yeah. So it's just interesting to put that in contrast that with shit that the West and America, really, I mean by that, they concern themselves with all these different elections around the world by using the OAS, the Organization of American States, as an arm to, attempt to sway these elections in Bolivia, Venezuela, all these other countries where there's real leftist leaders that they don't like. And the difference here is everyone knew about this. This wasn't like, again, it's like what I said, the other, we were talking about Biden and them claiming like, I love it when they people in extreme positions of power try to act like they didn't have any understanding of this. Like, I'm just a guy on his couch Googling shit. You know what I mean? Like, these people know and understand that Myanmar's constitution is set up this way. They know. And if there ever was a time for you to start leaning on other countries, and, I'm not saying invade them or anything, but if it turns to that where you have this mass uprising, the civilian population, you have clear data on what the election went like and the military took over. Isn't this like what an invasion would be for? And I'm not advocating that again. Let them figure it out. If they need to have a full-blown North Vietnam versus South Vietnam, like have a civil war, cool. We should still stay out of it until something, insane happens.
What's China's approach to been on all this? Did you?
I looked. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen anything, which suggests to me that they probably have. I would assume China would have no problem using this as, somewhat cynically and being like, oh, yeah, we support Suu Kyi. But I think they're probably going to let it play out a little bit because at this point, even for them, like, it's just like I said, like, what's the point? This isn't a huge geopolitical, like, this isn't any area of import for them or for the West or anything. There's no mineral wealth here, really. So it's like, again, what would be the use of a superpower even expending political capital here? You know, and that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, some of the main kind of things they've been involved in and have been illicit, like, gems, timber in remote regions, oil and gas, even protection for drug gangs.
Right.
So we're talking about a government entity who really are not worried about economic stronghold type of government for Myanmar. So
no, because they know they're not at risk of their corporations breaking off from them because they run them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, that's not, and these things are all, they're very, I get it. Like, they all seem like they're all disparate issues, but they're all very interconnected because all these things that we're talking about, like who are the heads of industry, who actually, is it a real democracy? What's the military's role here? All of these things play into how other countries will react to things like this on the world stage. They're all doing their measurement. They're all, China's got their, they got an abacus sitting there running the numbers like, what could we do here if we even cared to? Yep. And it's a non-starter. Like, what would be the point? Because they're completely insulated from the inside. The West can do stuff like, they can do some economic sanctions or whatever, but what would that really do? It's only going to hurt. If the military controls all the resources, they're just going to starve it from the people and keep themselves strong. So what would you gain by that either? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't know how this gets resolved. Like, you just kind of have to hope that there's, there's enough fight in some of these folks here to at least keep the noise up and put some pressure on. But this is just going to continue to be violent. If you look at how the chessboard's set up, I don't really see any way out of this.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. And I think when we covered it, our first or second episode, it just started, and I was kind of naive to, and I kind of always knew that Burma and Myanmar was quite contested, and they've been in and out of conflicts, for as long as I can remember or even research. But you enlightened me on how their actual government is set up, which doesn't bode well for moving forward.
No, you need a revolution and to rewrite the Constitution.
Yeah. And these guys are heavy-handed.
Yeah, the military has to be defeated.
Yeah.
And if they're sending all these different signals where, you know, if they were going to stop a landslide election like that, and like, what are they going to hold, like new elections?
Right.
Because here's the thing: they're never going to get to a point where the military is going to win in a democracy again.
Mm-hmm.
Not after they robbed all those people who voted.
Mm-hmm.
So even if, you know, you have significant voter participation again, it's either going to be one of two things. You're just going to have people who are going to boycott it and just keep fighting.
Right.
Or they're going to go and vote again, and the military is just going to juke the stats and just ballot stuff or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then and that's probably the most likely course of what's going to happen. And then the whole world gets to pretend that they're a democracy again.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably what's going to happen. If that constitution doesn't get changed, if there isn't an actual revolution, nothing's going to happen.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, my thoughts go out to the people in Myanmar, the poor innocent people who, you know, much like in any conflict, are stuck in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, you know, the next quick hit I wanted to get into was something that I've been seeing, you know, being shared back home a lot, and, you know, people have been talking about it, you know, quite a bit, and it was the murder of Sarah Everard. Now, this was a 33-year-old marketing executive who disappeared back on March 3rd. She was walking home from a friend's house in London, and a week later, her body was found 50 miles away in a wooded area. You know, a major plot twist to it was a guy called Wayne Cousins, who was a Scotland Yard. Scotland Yard is like an elite officer within the London police force. He's been charged with her kidnapping and murder. Now, around this, the conversation has been about, you know, generally how women, you know, since this, it kind of turned into a hashtag movement, much like Me Too, where women have been sharing stories about how, you know, an overwhelming amount of women have felt like they've been sexually harassed, threatened, or, you know, even had violence against them. And I think, you know, it creates a greater conversation. And, you know, for me, sometimes when a hashtag movement starts, you know, that you can be cynical, right? It can turn into just people start sharing things. But I think, you know, it's apparent, you know, growing up as men, as boys, been around men and boys, you know, we take a big responsibility in terms of how we see women, see our women, how we talk to women, how we make them feel. And, you know, even yesterday, it was crazy because I was kind of looking up the story yesterday and kind of digging a bit deeper. And I'm stopped at the light here. And there's a woman on the phone. And I literally was just after been reading about it. And I was driving with my daughter, which obviously that adds to this whole story as well. Now that I am a father myself, a girl dad, stopped at a light and a woman is crossing the street. And there's two fellas crossing the street opposite her. She's on the phone and she was a good looking girl, right?
Yeah.
By herself. And the guys literally, from when they caught glimpse of her to the time she was back across the street, literally, you know, 50 feet across the street, started talking to her, started shouting at her, saying like, where are you from? You know, like aggressively, pretty aggressively. And I was just like thinking, wow. And that's an instance in broad daylight.
Right.
So if that girl is walking home at, let's say, 2-3 o'clock in the morning in a city, you know, how is she going to feel during that?
Right.
So, you know, the greater conversation that has been started around it is, you know, this girl kind of did all the things that she was supposed to do.
Right. Yeah, she was checking in with her friend.
She was checking in. And I think now from this, you know, the onus is really on men, right? To kind of change how we, you know, talk about, you know, women. And, you know, it all seems like kind of grand ideas. And always the pushback with this is that, like, with stuff like the Me Too movement, is that we go too far. But it is a cultural thing, right? It's like,
right.
Yeah, how do we change that, I guess, as a society? When you have so many women who, you know, and I can even, from a father standpoint of a girl who's going to grow up, like, you know, into a woman and will probably, I hope not, but will probably receive this type of harassment and you know, catcalling and all that. Every single woman has that. So, I mean, what can we do from this point? I think another thing to add to this as well is that there was protests and vigils at the site of where she was, you know, kidnapped.
Right.
and the London police force were quite heavy-handed in shutting those down for, COVID reasons or whatever it was.
Right.
And got quite physical with a lot of women at it. And there's footage coming out now and it kind of shows that. And it's like, okay, is this the time to be doing that? It's kind of turned into a global movement.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I saw that. I thought that was like, it was interesting too, because like if you compare that to like we were in the height of our first wave, like when all the protests we referred to last summer here over the George Floyd murder, and like that was an interesting contrast where no one was trying to break up things based off of like coronavirus. So it's interesting to see that comparison to like it's happened in other European countries too, not necessarily for like protest reasons or what movements like this is, or just vigils and stuff like that.
Yeah,
but like it seems like Europeans take that much more seriously. Like they actually have more. A lot of their lockdowns have been much more strict. Curfews, like what is it, like France was having like 6 p.m. curfews and stuff, really pretty strict stuff. And I get it, you know what I mean? Like you from a policy standpoint as a government want to do those things, but again, like the optics of that are terrible. And sometimes it's like, people are wearing masks, you gotta let when you arguably make things more dangerous doing that, trying to have a presence and shove around and command around big bodies of people that in their minds aren't even thinking about that stuff. You know what I mean? It's almost like an intrusion upon a sacred thing. Everybody's trying to coalesce around
and heal.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I think, I mentioned that the onus is on men, right? But the onus is on a society to teach, about gender-based violence, because I would argue that, and I'm sure there's data on it that'll probably come out or is already there, that like 90% of violence against women, whether it be murders or just physical violence in general, is probably done by men.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So, I mean, as a society, what can we do? And it's we have to kind of teach, number one, our young men and boys that this is not how we behave. You don't want to do that. And then also teaching women to speak up and stand out. And I think on the back of something like the Me Too movement, and then obviously, this is kind of gathering momentum as a movement, or at least shining the light again on that, gender-based violence, that hopefully, more women will talk about these and it humanizes it because for a long, long time, and I'm only speaking for me personally, I didn't really know how often it went on. And I can't say that I've never, tried to chat up a girl or, even catcall a girl,
Right.
But now in hindsight, being a father, seeing and listening to girls' stories about it and understanding how it makes them feel, that really matters in hearing that. So the fact that it's vocally said now and people are talking about this stuff is an important issue.
Right. And that's what always mystifies me, right? It's like you hear, things like this are more prominent, obviously the Me Too movement, all these other, different events like her murder and things that pop up that kind of like they restart the engine on that conversation, right? And I always try to so just like what you were saying, I was a dickhead when I was younger too, that's just, I don't want to say like it's the boys will be boys thing, but part of it is like none of this stuff was going on when we were younger. So for people who, and I mean like by saying that, I mean like the Me Too movement and things like that.
Right.
Like unless you had a strong woman in your life that was like telling you these things, or you had some example that you could witness, because that's all we are, is a collection of our experiences, right?
Yep.
So like as I got older, and I had my run-ins with like, racism and all that stuff. It was easier for me, like once all the Me Too stuff started, not to put myself in their shoes because I can never be a woman, but to empathize and be like, that feeling of powerlessness or like not being accepted or just otherized,
right?
For being a woman. Like I can almost get that, I mean? It's easier for me to like have that understanding of where they're coming from, because again, it's something that a lot of men, you can't really like imagine yourself in that situation where you're like just walking across the street scared.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I'm sure like depending on where you live, I mean, there was times when I growing up in Schenectady, like, you're worried, but there's a difference between being worried
as a man.
Yeah. And like scared that,
right.
And like women do like, what was it? I was listening to a bunch of coverage and some of the women speaking at the vigils and stuff. And like you said, they were saying like, oh, she did everything right. She let her friend know what time she left. It was like a 16-minute walk and she was checking in or whatever.
Right.
And it's like, wow, holy shit, you have to do all that. And then that, like, in my head reminds me of, like the talk that like black parents talk about having with their kids in like America about police. Except the difference is here, black folks got to look out for police. Women got to look out for every man.
Right.
And that's, the scale of that is terrifying. You know what I mean? Especially if you're talking about at night. And it's just, I just wanted to say that because I know that, you're going to get right wingers, or not even just right wingers, but just like, people who are beaten down with like, all the culture war and the social justice warrioring stuff and all that. And it's like, but these conversations, these ones like this, and I think this is unique too in this regard, because like with the Sarah Everard case, it's like, this isn't something that like there isn't anything you could do to change this policy wise. Like murder's already illegal. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing the government can do.
Right.
This is something that is inherently a cultural issue. Yeah. You know what I mean? It compared to like George Floyd or any of this other stuff. Like, no, there's a ton of shit legislation we can write to and disincentivize those things or whatever. But how do you stop men from just being dickheads?
Right. I mean, I guess you might have like the Violence Against Women Act, which I believe some people voted against the renewal of the Violence Against Women Act this week in the US. Yeah. In the US Parliament. But also, to take a step back and look at it from a US standpoint, we had the Access Hollywood tapes come out of Donald Trump where he's literally talking about sexual assault and grabbing him by the pussy. Right. And that wasn't even disqualifying enough and just pushed off as locker room talk. Don't tell me that is not an instance of culture being accepted to the highest level of office in the United States and potentially the world. Right. And that's why people were shocked and concerned by it, right? Because that's what he was doing is like, so obviously there were the people who were like, oh, calling for, him to step down, or there'd be investigations based off of what he said and what other women had said. Mm-hmm. But the more damaging thing, in my opinion, is he's reifying that old culture of that. Yeah. That's the real issue. Like in that single little statement that he made, he bolstered that idea in the minds of so many people who were looking for any type of response to something like the Me Too. Yep. Just something like a little comforting blanket for them to put over their shoulders and be like, oh no, it used to be like this back in the day. It's fine. Look, he's the president. Yeah. You know what I mean? The entitlement. Yeah, I think people don't realize like the level of impact that stuff has. And, like a lot of right wingers, and especially a lot of Nazis, say like politics is downstream from culture, and there is some truth to that. Mm-hmm. There's some truth to it, especially when you're talking about these social relation issues. Yep. There's a ton of truth to that. Not so much in the policy realm, but when you're talking about these social issues where, again, you're like in a box where you can't legislate your way out of that. You know what I mean? What do you do? What do you make it illegal to catcall a woman? You can't do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. You can't do shit like that. So that's my point. This is something that explicitly needs to be handled with a culture-wide, country-wide, worldwide healing process where people can understand like the simple idea of like, hey, let me like try to actively not do things that make people feel bad. Right. That's really all it is. It's not any more complicated than that. You know what I mean? And it'll make you a better person for it. It's not about virtue signaling or, trying to adhere and like show, this is, I'm a good person. Like, sure, some people might do it for that. And if they do it for those reasons, whatever, I don't give a shit. But at least they're doing it. And some of these things are just small things that we can do as men, as boys. Like, again, I'm not trying to virtue signal here, but some of the stuff that I do to make women feel more comfortable is if I'm walking behind a woman at nighttime or nighttime predominantly, I tend to cross over the street to allow her to walk on her side of the street. Seems kind of extreme, but it goes a long way to make her feel at ease if there's only a couple of people on the street and you're walking behind her and you want to walk a bit faster. Right. I think it's, what is it? The black comedian. Is it Michael Che? I think he had like a whole... Oh, he did? Yeah, like a whole thing on it where he's basically like, I was terrified. I was walking in New York City and I turned a corner and there was a white woman walking the same way as me and I panicked. Yeah. And he was like, I was like, do I go to... What do I do to not be behind her? Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's a joke, but... Yeah, but it's a small thing that can go a long way to alleviate her stress. Right. And again, the goal isn't like to make you... And because that's the thing, right? Like that's the right-wing argument. It's like, oh, this is trying to like make me feel bad and condition me. And it's like, no, it's not that. It's if that happens to you, that's
That's your own internal thing. No one's intentionally doing that to make you feel that way. Again, the idea is it's to make you aware of how other people feel when you do things.
It's not about you, bro.
Yeah, it's not about you all the time. Yeah, like seriously. And again, I go back to this idea of, and this is how I try to live this through my politics too. It's like, you're going to feel better about who you are as a person when you make that extra effort to be more acquiescing to to other people's needs and not intruding on them. Right. You know what I mean? That's not a lot. It really like, and if that concept really like interferes with like who you are that much, you know, then you should really do some deep thinking and think about like what your actual values are and who you think you are. Right. You know what I mean? Because if those are the things that define you, you know, catcalling or like, Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organ. You know, if those are the defining things that are like world shattering for you to at least give some thought to the other side of like, you know, what are the effects of these things? What are these people actually trying to do with these culture movements? You know what I mean? Like, you got some serious digging to do.
Right. And the last thing I'll say is some of the most refreshing things you can see is when, much like the racism thought, or when people are like being passively racist or just talking with their boys and they say something that's you know racist, is when we call out each other, right? Whether it's racism, sexism, you know, just shitty talk in general, that will have an impact, right? So don't be passive when it comes to these things. You know, be a leader, even if it's just within that conversation, because it really does. It matters, and it matters a lot. Right.
And then just the last piece I want to add to this is like, anyone who knows me personally knows like I don't. So like while we're discussing this, I think there's a ton of value in like, I'm trying to package it in a way where it's like, you should do this for yourself. It's not even just for, the betterment of the world, or like so women don't feel threatened, or like not do racist shit so people don't feel bad. It's going to make you feel better. Right. That doing those things is self-destructive. It makes you feel worse in the long term. It's an unconscious effect that it has on you because you're constantly putting down people, projecting things on other people, and never looking inside. Why am I doing this? How is this making other people feel? And the reason I like what I said, like anyone who knows me, I don't want this to be the main star of the show when it comes to politics. I want us to be able to handle these things through the culture, separate from it always being the leading issues in our politics. Because what happens is, again, like I just said before, a ton of these issues aren't things that can be legislated out of. Okay? So I'm not saying they shouldn't be discussed in our politics. That's not what I mean. But it's a huge problem when you have them being the front and center thing that most people relate to politics with, where they think that that's what politics is. It's a huge fucking problem. It enables people to just like use like identity culture and all these other things cynically that already have power to cover their own ass. BB does it. We were just talking about him. He's like, oh, the ICC ruling? Oh, that's anti-Semitic. Yeah. Like that's not related to this women thing, but that's in the realm of what I'm talking about right now. Yeah. Politics. People will use this shit cynically when culture war issues like this are at the forefront of our politics all the time. So we have to figure out a way to I don't know. I don't know what the prescription is, but we just got to do a better job of handling this shit because it's ruining our politics too.
We got to be best.
Yeah. It's fucking ruining our politics too. Like it really is. It stagnates and slows the pace of the actual legislative change we need because it's a constant extra frequency, just adding fuzz and noise and fucking with people's heads, allowing a ton of people not to engage with actual political issues in the realm of politics and policy by just kicking it off to this stuff. And again, it's not like it's not important, but largely politicians talking about these things exclusively and not actually doing politics, it's an out for a lot of them because they don't actually have to do anything. They can't write a fucking law for this stuff. Yeah. So we I don't know, man. We're in a place where that's something very concerning to me. But again, like the work's worth doing. At the very least, do it for yourself.
And I think, that quick hit, is a perfect segue into our domestic topic, which, is something that I know you're chomping at the bit to speak about.
Oh, baby.
So, do you want to cut this out and take a little break? Or actually pass me We're reeing up on our Heinekens here for this one.
Get the next Heine going, folks. All right, yeah. So
I know you're chomping at the bit for this one.
Yeah, I've been wanting to get into this for quite a while, and it rolls very nicely into the conversation we were having before. Sarah Everard and the larger cultural issues at hand.
That's the crack of a hiney there. If you don't know what that sounds like.
Cheers.
Not my go-to, but I'll drink him.
All right, so what we're gonna get into now is Cuomo's dual threats here. Okay, so. Oh man, I know you guys have seen this. It's unavoidable. There's no way you haven't, especially being from New York, which most of our listeners, I would assume, are.
Shout out Ireland.
Yeah, shout out them boys out there too. Yeah, no, we're having a grand old time here with our governor, folks. So he is facing the dual threat of 7 sexual harassment, and I would argue one of them sexual assault accusations here in New York, and the nursing home data issue. So we're gonna dive into the issues he has with these women first. There have now been a total of 7 accusers of the governor, with a brand new one that actually just dropped last night. So we're just I'm gonna try to run through all these, give them their due diligence, each one. I'm not gonna get too in depth, and then we're gonna wrap it back around to the larger conversation. So I've got here from the New York Times. Charlotte Bennett is a 25-year-old former aide to the government, and she accused him of sexually harassing her last year. She told the New York Times that Mr. Cuomo had asked her about her sex life and whether she ever had sex with older men. On one occasion, Ms. Bennett said she was alone with Mr. Cuomo at his state capitol office when he asked whether she thought age mattered in romantic relationships. She took the remark as an overture to a sexual relationship. She says, quote, "I understand that the governor wanted to sleep with me and felt horribly uncomfortable and scared." Ms. Bennett said she reported the interaction to Mr. Cuomo's chief of staff, provided a lengthy statement about it to the special counsel of the governor, and was transferred to a different job. And mind you, that was of her own volition. She wanted the different job. They didn't just transfer her because of it. And then she left the administration in November. That's number one.
Do you know when that allegation took place, or when
that was October. So what she did was, Charlotte Bennett, I believe her allegation was in October, but it hadn't broken yet because the story was apparently still being, like I said, the Times was working on the story, but they hadn't broken it yet. And I will get to the speculation of why the order of all this and the repetition of all this has happened so much afterwards. But here we're going to kick right to I'm just trying to run through all these real fast. Go. So Miss Bennett, the first one we were just talking about, her allegations came shortly after another former administration aide, Lindsey Boylan. She elaborated on sexual harassment accusations that she'd first made against the governor in vague terms in Twitter posts in December. Then she went on to write in an online essay. She worked at the State Economic Development Agency from 2015 to 2018 and detailed years of uncomfortable interactions with Mr. Cuomo. Ms. Boylan, who's 36, said her boss at the time had told Mr. Cuomo had told her that Cuomo had a crush on her. She also said he had gone out of his way to touch my lower back, arms, and legs. I mean leg. Like, whoa, okay, let's just keep going.
Right, yeah.
In October 2017, Ms. Boylan wrote, Cuomo told her they should play strip poker during a flight from an event in Western New York. In 2018, she said Mr. Cuomo gave her an unsolicited kiss at his Manhattan office. Quote, "As I got up to leave and walked toward an open door, he stepped in front of me and kissed me on the lips," wrote Ms. Boylan. Okay, so that's the second accusation here. And that one we're going to get quite in depth on later. Third here is Anna Rush, who's 33. She said she encountered Mr. Cuomo at a wedding in September of 2019. That's the still of Cuomo holding the woman's face. I'm sure you all saw that image. They had begun talking about a toast the governor had made when Mr. Cuomo put his hand on her bare lower back, Miss Ruch said. When she removed it, she said he said that she seemed, quote, aggressive, placed his hands on her cheeks and asked if he could kiss her. Miss Ruch said she pulled away as Cuomo drew closer, and she says, quote, "I was so confused and shocked and embarrassed," said Miss Ruch, who, again, was never employed by the governor. So she's just a civilian, folks, not even a woman in his staff. Then the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal both published accounts from 2 other women who accused Cuomo of behaving inappropriately. The Post account involved Karen Hinton, a paid consultant to Mr. Cuomo when he was the federal housing secretary. He was HUD secretary back in the day. Miss Hinton told the Post that Mr. Cuomo had given her an unsolicited, intimate embrace after summoning her to a hotel room in 2000. She said she resisted when he tried to do it a second time. Mr. Cuomo denied Ms. Hinton's account and called her a longtime political adversary. The Journal report concerned Anna Leese, a former aide who said Mr. Cuomo had made her uncomfortable by kissing her on the hand and asking questions about her romantic life. Mr. Cuomo said the exchange with Miss Liss was consistent with the way he generally acted with members of the staff. Cool.
It's just Andy being Andy.
Cool. Just telling on himself. Awesome. And this is just real quick interjection before I get right back into this. Like, this is what happens in my, like, for me, why I'm so like, oh yeah, he totally did it. Because whenever you see these guys who are like generally gregarious in public and like a dozen women come out and accuse them and it all happens like crescendoing over time, you start seeing them make these kinds of statements like, oh, well, I treat everyone that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's not an excuse. That's that's a fucking indictment of, oh, so you kiss all your staff. No place I've ever worked.
No.
I don't care. Like, he's going to be like, oh, I'm Italian. That's not an excuse. I'm sorry.
No,
it's just not. It's not. Kissing women on the hand and you're their boss. Like,
and those types of questions as well. And I think, you know, we'll probably get into it as you continue to list out these different women. You know, it also puts women who are subordinate to him in a difficult position, right? Because, you know, we saw it with the Me Too movement is you have these people who have the power to kind of make or break you, so to speak.
Totally.
Or like they could give you the perception that they do, that if you don't kind of take them up on their advances, that you're somehow going to be ostracized within a government.
Exactly. And that's what and that's why it really hits for me too, because anyone who knows New York politics, you know, we got into a little bit the last time we talked about him. He runs the state with an iron fist. Like that is for all the people who are like, oh, why didn't they just do this? Why didn't they do that? He will fucking end you in New York. Mm-hmm. He will end you in New York. There's been dozens of accounts of this. This isn't anything new. He's been known to be extremely aggressive going after political enemies for at least the last like 16 years. But hold on, let's continue. So here we go. And then we had the Times Union of Albany, you get a little local reporting here, folks, then reported that an aide who currently works for Mr. Cuomo had accused him of groping her in the executive mansion. The woman who the newspaper did not identify and has yet to identify said she'd been summoned to the governor's private residence last year to help him with a technical issue. When they were alone on the second floor, he closed the door, reached under her blouse, and began to touch her, the newspaper reported. Then yet another allegation of harassment emerged in a first-person essay in the New York magazine by Jessica Bakeman, a former Albany reporter who described several instances when Mr. Cuomo was either physically inappropriate with her or publicly demeaned her. And then finally, to bring in the seventh, last night, in the last night, in the latest allegation against Governor Cuomo, Alyssa McGrath, a current employee of the governor's office, described a series of unsettling interactions with the governor, telling the New York Times that Mr. Cuomo would ogle her body, remark on her looks, and make suggestive comments to her and another executive aide. So, and basically what happened with that story from everything that I read was, there was tons of different instances. Alyssa McGrath actually knows the unnamed woman from the Albany Times Union report, and she corroborated all of it with the New York Times. And in reference to her saying that he would, quote, ogle her body and remark on her looks, she said that, he called her into her office to dictate notes, and she was sitting there at his desk while he was walking around and talking. She was recording the notes, and he just stopped, and she looked up, and he was just looking down her shirt and was like, oh, what's that charm necklace you have there? That was like resting between her breasts. So, yeah. All right. So, wow, this guy is amazing. Yeah. So, and just to cap all that off, the state attorney general, Letitia James, has now opened an investigation into the claims and has named 2 outside lawyers to lead it. One of the lawyers is a sexual assault and harassment expert, and another one is a workplace prosecutor.
So I guess, should we break down kind of the first facet to these 2 different types of allegations before we get into his nursing home mishandling?
Yeah. I think we should spend some time here and just ruminate on, like we were saying earlier, I just couldn't help myself. I had to interject. Like, the level at which some of the people who've gone to bat for Cuomo and he himself are attempting to like do effectively what Trump did and what you were just talking about earlier, like with the Access Hollywood tape. They're trying to like normalize what he's doing. They're trying to make it seem like, oh, he treats everyone that way, because he's only denied a handful of these, like the ones that like putting his hand on the woman's shirt. Obviously, that's sexual assault if she charged it that way. That's the case in Albany, by the way, folks, that the Albany Police Department has jurisdiction over if that woman chooses to so file.
Right.
So that one's I would argue, the lone assault case. I mean, I don't know
that we know of that people
right, but who've come forward.
Yeah.
I don't know if the other woman, was it Lindsay Boylan, who said that he kissed her. I don't know if that is sexual assault. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to check. But the rest of them, being harassment, he's effectively trying to normalize the harassment of at least 3 of these cases, where his response in the media has always been like, I treat all my staff this way.
Yeah.
That's not a fucking...
It's half apology, because some of his press conferences and like scrums since this have been some of the weakest attempt at trying to apologize, kind of, where he's like, I apologized for how I made those people feel and not for actually what he did.
Right.
What's more glaring for me is, and again, all this is allegations, but much like any of these instances, is once one person comes out, other people start to come out. What's most glaring for me is he had the audacity to do these things. As governor of New York in a position of power, he had the audacity to do these things and thought that none of this would ever blow back on him, which speaks to a man who's, 60... I don't know, 60, what is he?
63.
63. So I can only imagine he's been doing this type of stuff and acting this way for a long, long time. Right.
And then that connects directly to what we were just saying about the culture of what we normalize, because that's the thing, right? You could almost have this conversation like, and again, this isn't me like excusing his behavior, but the fact that he's 63, he is old school Italian, which, there's different cultures where people do, have different social boundaries. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And he did grow up that way. He's hardcore Italian. You fucking heard him and his brother on CNN dicking around all in the pandemic talking about, oh, I got mama's sauce.
Playful. Yeah.
She gave me the sauce recipe. She didn't give it to you.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, when you have this level of power and you do that, no one's fucking saying stop, like it's wrong.
Right.
No one's admonishing you. It becomes normalized. And that's the huge issue. And that's a big part of what McGrath, the woman who came forward in the one of the stories, not the latest one, but it was the one that she came forward last night. That piece was excellent because she knows the unnamed woman who he put her who accused him of groping her. She's unidentified. She knows that woman. She's given text messages and corroborating evidence of her communicating with that woman, both of them doubly verifying their instances to investigators already. And them both saying talking about the first 5 women that came out and saying wow, we have to say something. It'd be irresponsible of us not to come forward and say something. They'd talked about it before. She gets in detail in this article talking about how he would basically pit women in the staff against one another, right? So for example, the unidentified woman, Cuomo had her take a picture of them in the governor's chair in the mansion and then send it to McGrath. And McGrath's like, well, I don't
what does this
This
mean?
is him. She's theorizing.
Mind games, yeah.
She's saying oh, he's trying to make me jealous or something.
Right.
And there has been plenty of other reported instances in the past, way before this happened. This was years ago. The Times reported it. Where there were women in his staff off the record, unidentified, saying that he would do that. He would basically play favorites. There'd be a girl of the month, and everyone was aware of it.
Yeah, and it's no shock to a lot of people that even here in New York, I've heard stories of him just being generally a bad guy to work for.
Right.
Outside of any, sexual promiscuity that he had or stuff that he did, just how he spoke to people. And it speaks to what you said about him kind of ruling in that type of way.
Right.
But what's glaring for me with all this is, certain elements of the Democratic Party here in New York tying themselves in knots, trying to excuse away some of these allegations. Now, outside of whether any of this is something he can be prosecuted on from a legal level, just from a behavioral standpoint for the governor of, arguably one of the greatest or, most influential states in the country to act this way is just it's untenable for him to stay where he is.
Right.
He has to go. He should have resigned already. But yeah.
And that reminds me, by the way, one of his significant quotes in the last few days was that he said, for the people demanding that he resign, it would be undemocratic for him to step down. Now, no, it wouldn't, because you have a lieutenant governor who people also voted for that would step right in. All the people who are making the insane, it's a lot of liberals. I see it on Twitter. I see it online. I've seen a couple people mention it in some smaller media that are like, Democratic Party apparatchiks being like, oh, if he steps down, it'll make room for a Republican governor to step in, like win the next election coming up. Ain't no fucking Republican governor going to win in a statewide election in New York anytime soon. You look at these numbers, they're insane. They'd have to run like Trump or something for a Republican to win New York State. So that's just a lie. Again, you see all the spinning coming out of it. I don't have it pulled up here directly, but I'll paraphrase it. The article, the digital media site, I believe it was Politics New York. They wrote an insane piece. They had a congresswoman from downstate, a black woman, who clearly, from my reading of it, basically went up to bat for Cuomo, where she was questioning the veracity of these women's claims. And she was saying, I've never had any experience with him like that. And she went into all these really weird tropes where she was like, oh, well, as a black woman, like that would never happen to me. Like really odd and weird, like trying to otherize these women for being victims, where she was like, oh, that would never happen to me. Right. You know what I mean? Which, that's something that we didn't really get into it. But when you talk about these issues with women, there's definitely like more conservative women that I know in my life personally that say things exactly like that. Like they'll victim blame and be like, oh, well, how'd they ever let that happen?
What was she wearing? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So this woman goes on record basically saying, oh, that's never happened to me, blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm paraphrasing. But then she goes on to say, oh, and we all know what happens historically when white women falsely accuse men of things. And then the writer of the article goes on to editorialize and talk about what happened with Emmett Till. Talking about how when black men used to catcall women, blah, blah, which we all know was bullshit. Yeah. With the Emmett Till case anyway, in case anyone doesn't know how that turned out, he got lynched and was murdered.
Yeah, famous photograph that you can all look up.
Yeah, for, quote, for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Yeah. So these people went to the extent of comparing fucking Cuomo to Emmett Till. That's how bad. That right there shows. That's proof positive of everything I've been saying and all of leftist media has been saying about this man for over a decade, that he rules this state with an iron fist. You wouldn't. Are you kidding me? If this was happening to like Chuck Schumer or like I don't know, Tonko or any other white guy in New York, no one would fucking editorialize comparing them to Emmett Till. Right. Okay? That's someone either trading a favor that fucking owed him something or is praying to God he survives this and is looking at a real nice salary boost or a new job somewhere afterwards. Right. Nobody in their right fucking mind would write in an article and compare Andrew Cuomo to Emmett Till.
And he had the actual gall on one of his most recent press calls to say that he wasn't establishment. What did he say?
Yeah, he's not of the establishment.
He's not of the establishment or elite. Coming from the former HUD secretary,
you've been in
Attorney General,
cabinet before.
Yeah, Attorney General, coming from a family where his dad was a two-time governor? Yep. Now he's governor. It's like, where is he living in his mind? I don't know.
Just incredible. So yeah.
And I'll say before anybody wants to call me out on this, I was, and this is before I really delved into Cuomo, the man, when COVID started gathering pace, probably about this time last year, I was very, praising of his, information and his kind of like everyday kind of giving us info on where we were at, case numbers. As was I. It was calming. Because it was a lot of unknowns.
He did the right political move where he stayed in constant contact with the people. We were, if you guys remember, we were the epicenter of the outbreak in America for a long time. And that was the correct political calculation. This man has very good political instincts. Yeah. He made the correct calculation there. He said, I'm going to bring it on me. I'm going to take this shit off the clown show of Trump. I'm going to bring it to me. And I'm going to, I'm not saying that he did it 100% cynically, but some might argue he did because he wrote a fucking book about it. But he did, try to assert and be an alternate leader of the country for the pandemic in that regard. The whole country was tuning into his little
he had a whole fan club.
Corona fireside chat.
Como-sexuals, they were calling themselves.
So I get it. I get why people, he bolstered his armor when it comes to support, his collective armor of all the Democratic support around the country, and especially in
people
New
are
York.
talking about presidential runs.
Yeah, I understand all that. But the thing is, at the end of the day, folks, we have to be objective when you're looking at things like, especially like sexual assault allegations.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of this next part that we're going to roll into here.
Let's roll into it.
Let's get into it.
Not to minimize what we're talking about, but there's, like I said, there's two facets to this.
Right. And like I said, I termed this segment his dual threats because, this is really like, he's probably the only politician that's like a non-national level politician that wouldn't have immediately caved and resigned over these things.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just, again, it's a testament to how much power he has.
Influence, yep.
So this segment here is his covering up of the nursing home deaths, him and his administration. So, all right, back in January, according to the New York Times, Attorney General Letitia James reported that the administration had undercounted virus-related deaths of nursing home residents by several thousand. Hours later after her announcement, the health department added more than 3,800 such deaths to its tally. So now this is something that we touched on a little bit in an earlier podcast, but this was an ongoing story towards the back, from last summer all the way through the winter, where again, I know I keep saying it and it seems like it's like ideological, but it's not. Like left media outlets, actual, people to the left of Cuomo and the Democratic Party were reporting on this for a long time, and it just never touched mainstream coverage.
Yep.
You had the Republican Party in New York was hounding Cuomo from about, I think it was July 2020, all the way through the winter.
Shout out Jim Tedesco.
Yeah, hounding him to try to find out, why aren't we getting the numbers? They were requesting the total number of deaths in nursing homes, and Cuomo was obfuscating. Now, to give Cuomo's side of the argument here, he also had requests for nursing home death data from the Justice Department. And at the time, remember, that was Trump's Justice Department. And they've literally said it in the media. One of his aides, Melissa DeRosa, actually said it as if it was a legitimate excuse, that they feared prosecution from the Trump administration, which was the reason for curtailing the numbers. So right off the bat, that's an admission. I don't give a fuck what anyone says around procedure, FOIA requests from right-wing think tanks that were asking about it first, and then the Republican Assembly started asking about them, and then the Fed under Trump started asking for them after that. That was the order of how it happened. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter however way you try to skin that cat. Melissa DeRosa admitted to falsifying documents. Right there alone, that's a felony.
Yeah.
That is a felony.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter in the state of New York. Mm-hmm. You're saying straight up, we were scared Trump was going to try to go after us, so we juked the fucking stats.
Yep.
And the way that they did that, guys, just to give you a refresher, is what they did was nursing home patients who were sent to hospitals and died at hospitals, they didn't count in the count. That's not how that's supposed to work. They count for both counts. You don't take them from one or the other. If a person dies in a hospital, the hospital has that on their tally, right? Mm-hmm. That's only, of course, right?
Yep.
You need a death certificate. You need all that shit. If that person's place of residence was a nursing home, they're still fucking dead. They caught coronavirus in your nursing home. Mm-hmm. You don't get to not add them to the tally. And mind you, we're talking about state-run nursing homes with these numbers. We're not talking about private nursing homes. This 3,800 that got added on were state-run nursing homes.
Yep.
Very important, okay? Because those are other charges that could likely come up because of that. So yeah, in reference to what I said before, according to the New York Times, on a private conference call in February, Melissa DeRosa, a top aide to Mr. Cuomo, told Democratic lawmakers that the state had withheld the data because it feared an investigation by the Trump administration. But according to documents and interviews, Ms. DeRosa was involved in rewriting the health department's report months before the Justice Department began seeking information about the administration's nursing home policy. So right there's your smoking gun, folks.
Yep.
His top aides were already in the process of fighting with our New York State Health Department to get numbers stricken from the record that the health department was correctly counting as nursing home deaths. Mm-hmm. So they were in the process of, again, this isn't like they took some report, got the PDF copy, and just edited the numbers. No. They were trying to do it at the source and argue with people to never even have those printed in the first place. So we're at a whole nother level with this shit here.
But what's most glaring for me, and I remember when this was, and this, after I just said that, I was very, praising of his handling with the kind of, come forward and speaking to us every single day about the state of the coronavirus. Back on April 3rd, 2020, Cuomo signed into law the state's budget bill for the year. And it included a little notice provision on page 347, if anybody wants to go back and see it, that basically nursing homes or other healthcare facilities shall have immunity from any liability, civil or criminal, for any harm or damages alleged to have sustained as a result of an act or omission in the course of arranging for or providing healthcare services. Now, that may seem like a little, note in a bigger budget, but in the context of everything that went down, looking back now, that was a strategic lobbying from probably the nursing homes and healthcare facilities.
Who are huge donors to Andrew Cuomo, by the way.
Huge.
He's received over $1 million from nursing home administrations, donations and contributions in the last 5 years.
Yep. And it covered both lawsuits and criminal prosecutions retroactively from March 7th. So, add this to the, obviously tampering that you talked about, falsification of documents. It's just, again, this is just another feather to the cap of an untenable governor who should be, investigated and prosecuted for both things, but at least step aside for one or the other.
Right.
Take your pick.
And just to get into real quick, we're talking about a lot of this is legal stuff here. Let's flip into the politics realm for a second. If you all remember last year, I believe it was the summer of 2020, pre-summer, actually, so late spring, Democrats, one of their huge talking points was they were trying to lift up to the media and make a huge counter talking point to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell wanted to put into one of the next stimulus bills that they were going to plan for after the first one in April when they did the stimulus checks. He wanted to put in corporate liability shields, just a general blanket one.
Yeah.
And that was after we had all the data about meatpacking companies, all these warehouses, people dropping dead like flies because they're in there crammed together. Everyone on the left collectively criticized Mitch McConnell for that. Everyone did. Lo and behold, a month before that, again, I keep saying it, keep going back to it, all these leftist media organizations were like, holy shit, raising the alarm bell about this fucking nursing home immunity that Cuomo passed in April. And then the worst part about it is the media had the gall to go on and criticize DeSantis in Florida and a bunch of other Republican-run states by governors for the exact same policy when Cuomo was the first one that did it. He built the blueprint for this shit.
Neolibs.
And it's just, again, so folks, I'm not saying never watch CNN, never watch MSNBC. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is you have to do your due diligence and actually consider what is the spin being applied here? Because if you had never had that piece of information, but you were one of those people loudly criticizing Mitch McConnell, think of how hypocritical that looks to people on the other side. Again, the whole goal of discourse in politics is you're trying to win people to your point, to your side. So you have public policy polling that supports your policies, right?
Yeah.
If you don't have the full story and you're being spun on something, a ton of people I would talk to about that had no idea. Yeah. And it was a giant, first off, just on a politics level, insane. But on an actual policy level for how it would function in the state, what you're doing is you're disincentivizing all these nursing home administrators from putting in COVID safeguards to prevent deaths. You're literally giving them a financial incentivization to not hire more staff, put in better filtration systems, I'm sure there's millions of things. My mom used to run one of these Alzheimer's centers. Mm-hmm. There's a million. She wrote policy. She was a director for them. Mm-hmm. That was an incredibly complicated job. And I'm sure it was insane during the pandemic.
Right.
But the point is you alleviated that concern for a lot of those people. And it does this unconscious thing. Again, I'm not saying these nursing home administrators are evil. No, I'm not saying that.
Right.
But when you take the pressure of money and possibly being sued for wrongful death out of the equation, you start writing policy a little different.
And in case
you start staffing a little different.
In case you had any doubt, the day before the measure became law, the kind of protection measures, the Greater New York Hospital Association, GNYHA, a major lobbying group that represents hospital systems, including some that own nursing homes, They donated more than 1.25 million to Cuomo's political operation. They sent out a memo stating that it had drafted and aggressively advocated for the legislation. So, I mean, in case you had any doubt of, first of all, if lobbying works, there you go. He's seen it in action. But
sure, we'll call it quote unquote lobbying. But when the actual industries or corporations who want the legislation are writing up drafts of it and fucking sending it to your government, that's just corruption, folks. That's not fucking lobbying.
Yep.
That is corruption.
Yep. Corruption that led to negligence.
So I don't know, man. I mean, we could go on about this forever, but that's the bulk of the info. People should look into some of this stuff. Again, you don't trust me. You don't trust Peadar. You're a Cuomo sexual, whatever. You love him. You think he did a great job in the pandemic or whatever other reasons you have. That's fine. But at the end of the day, these are hard facts. There's no spin on this. This is the truth of what happened.
Yeah.
People should look into
it. It's right there in legislation.
It's right there. It's right there. And the thing is, you don't need to disagree with the man politically. But on policy, there is no argument against these things. That was pure corruption. Yeah. Plain and simple.
Yeah. And then, just to add more of kind of the insanity to all of it, he had the absolute audacity to write a book about how he handled the pandemic during all this.
Crazy.
So, yeah, I don't know if you've had to add to, the Andrew Cuomo portion of this episode, but I mean,
I do want to add the final caveat of, we did mention this on the first episode where we did talk about Cuomo. I do want to add the caveat, again, this isn't me being frothing at the mouth because I don't like him I hate him. I'll be honest with you. I hate him. I hate what he's done to our politics here in New York because he's to me no different than we were just talking about Netanyahu or Trump. Because what he's done is he's confused things. People can't have objective reasoning on a lot of policy because of his presence, because of his reach, because of his influence in the state that has grown wildly disproportionate beyond what the scope of governor should be. Right. We didn't even get into the fact of how many times he overrode his own health officials on pandemic response and things like that. Yeah. And some of it might have been
his
good.
Executive powers.
Yeah. Some of it might have been good. Some of it might have been bad. We'd have to go through each one of those line for line. But at the end of the day, I do want to give the caveat of, sure, these people, anyone who was in control of a country at this point, or even a large state like New York, you were dealt a fucking impossible hand. Okay? I do recognize that. I'm not saying I would have did a better job or, anyone I like in politics would have done a better job. I don't know that. I can't predict that. I don't have a crystal ball. But at the end of the day, when you find out that these people lied about things and did policies that had an objective effect on how many humans died in our state, that's a fucking problem. That's a huge issue. That's not something that we should wrap in the blanket of party politics. Yeah. You can't do that.
That's a human issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up where we're at with Cuomo and where he's at. What sort of, I guess, what is your outlook for what's going to happen next with all this? I seem to think there's probably going to be a few more allegations that are going to pop up. The over-under on that.
I said it at 9.
You said it at 9?
Yeah, I said at 9. I took the over.
I might go double digits. And we're not trivializing, people who have suffered any trauma, but it is all quite laughable at the end of the day that this guy, who undoubtedly has a ton of influence, I sent you that picture of him wrapped in a blanket at the governor's residence with the beer in his hand on the phone, just screaming crisis.
A man in crisis.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, no, what's my outlook? The reason I named it this is I don't think anyone can, if anyone could, he has the best shot, like I said, literally in the whole country because of the nature of how the power of New York is constituted.
Ton of influence.
And even with all the people in the assembly, national level, Schumer, but Gillibrand calling for his him to resign in his own state, and a ton of national level politicians, the people that are in the state, they must know he's going to, because this is a huge shot. If you you come for the king, you best not miss.
Yeah.
If you miss and he doesn't go down, he's gonna set this state on fire.
Mhm.
He is gonna come after so many fucking people. So the way I'm thinking is there's probably more shit that we don't know about or more stuff coming down. Because again, these people all have essentially allied against him. You know, and I don't count Letitia James in that regard. I think she's done quite a good job of being objective, you know, being the AG she should be. But I don't know. I don't see him surviving this. The level at which, the repetition at which he got hit with all of this, and more just drip. And now we have Biden's Justice Department actually launching an investigation into the nursing home that's picking up off of where the Trump administration left off, on top of the fact that you have Albany.
That's a good look. That's a good look for the Biden
You have
Justice
to.
Department. You have to.
It would be completely unobjective if he didn't.
And this might be a dumb question, but you know, governor race 2022, right? If he's still there, if he's still New York governor, you know, he's obviously not going to go unopposed, right? As a Democratic.
No fucking way.
Yeah. But let's say he wins as a Democratic candidate. Is there any scenario? I know you mentioned if Trump was running as New York governor, do you think worst case scenario, he gets in as Democratic nominee or, you know, incumbent? Do you think a Republican could beat him?
No, absolutely not.
Even with these two things looming over his head?
No, and I'll tell you why. Because the thing is, the nature of, and we'll get into again, a little more inside politics. The nature of how New York state elections work, right? So we have closed primary elections. So what that does is it incentivizes, like, you know, heavy Democratic Party people. You know, if you look at the numbers, compare the primary race for Republicans and Democrats. Typically when there's it's super disproportionate. There's usually like 100% more Democrats that vote in the primary than Republicans do in total. That right there makes it so impossible, because people who vote in primaries will fucking show up to the general. Absolutely. And that's a huge advantage right there in and of itself. Not to mention, if you look at the numbers of all the past elections of the last 2 decades, the demographics are disproportionately out of control in New York for Democrats. There's no way. The only way that it would happen is if you had some person who had insane name recognition ran, which would, for me, would be Trump. You know, you got Larry Sharpe, the libertarian. He ran, not the last time, the time. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, he ran at the same time Cynthia Nixon and them did. Yeah, it would have to be someone. And that was why I said, like, you know, at the time, like, Cynthia Nixon is probably the only person who had a chance because the name recognition. Yeah. People knew who she was. Celebrities were kind of becoming a thing in politics again. Not that, you know, Schwarzenegger did it, Nixon. Yeah. But no, there's no fucking way a Republican's going to win.
Reagan, you mean?
No way. Or yeah, Reagan, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I think that summarizes it. I don't see him honestly lasting past July. But if anybody can, Andy can. Just a side note, I thought it was interesting, and I completely, just to like separate the two of them. His brother Chris on CNN obviously said he won't, cover it. He won't cover it. And I wouldn't do the same. I respect that.
I respect him. He shouldn't.
I mean, it'd be so tough to do that. It's just, you can't.
And to be honest, the network probably wouldn't let him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because it would just be egg on their face. Even if...
But that adds such a weird dynamic then onto it, because he's such a public figure himself. Right. And his dad's legacy, it's just a mess. And again,
they're all their little pop-ins that they had together on.
And if he truly cared about the state of New York and the people of New York, he would have stepped down already. Like...
Yeah, I mean... and
you can tell he's very ego driven.
And the thing is, we didn't even get into like too heavily of the national politics of all this, but like Biden put out a statement where he said, I support an independent investigation, which everyone should. And the thing is, like, all the people who were like, they're referring to like, Kirsten Gillibrand of her role in taking down Al Franken, which it completely too, like, I'm not defending her here. Because, again, we didn't have a ton of evidence on the Franken thing. We just had pictures, and like one woman, or was it 2 women? I'm sorry, said that he like made them feel uncomfortable. He tried to kiss the one woman, but let's keep in context. That was before he was a politician. That was before
he was a comedian.
That was before he had staff. He had power over. Like, these things aren't fucking comparable. But the point I wanted to make is, like, we have to stop comparing. You know what I mean? Just take each instance of these types of things at their own merit and look at them and look and see what the character of the person is and try to, because that's all you can do until the investigation does happen. But again, like the politics of it, if something doesn't come out of this where either he gets prosecuted successfully or it just, I pray to God, doesn't just vanish into obscurity.
No,
Because if that's what happens and you still have a ton of Democrats defending him, this is a huge political time bomb for the midterms. This is like one of like the three main things. I mean, and so far, we're only 3 months into 2021. Biden, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, like already bombing the Middle East. He's come up short in a lot of areas with the left. That's something he can rebound from. But when you talk about midterm elections and what the national level discussions are, how the Republicans are going to wield the fuck ups of Democrats having full majority control, Cuomo's definitely going to be on that list.
Definitely
Definitely going to be on that list.
And he's now been weaponized from a topical standpoint for Republicans.
Right.
You know, you already see it. There's plenty of, Donald Trump Jr.'s tweeting out memes of this, that, and the other.
Folks, don't forget, Donald Trump brought out Bill Clinton's accusers.
Yeah.
He set the blueprint. Republicans will play so fucking dirty with this shit.
Yeah.
They don't care that it's not like an election that has anything to do with Cuomo.
Yeah.
They will have they will
drag
your ass on this shit.
Yeah.
Trust me.
Yeah.
You don't want to have any loose ends where you have monsters operating in your party that can be weaponized against you.
Yep. That's that. That's the dual threat facing Governor Andrew Cuomo. We're going to take a little
we'll pop off here.
Break. All right, so that leads us then into our final topic, our foreign topic, which is the AstraZeneca vaccines being shelved by, was it a total of 16 European countries?
Is that what the count was?
Yeah, I think 16 in the end. Now, as of recording this, Friday, I believe they have started to resume vaccinating with the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Except Norway.
Except Norway, Norway didn't.
They're going to do a full week-long investigation.
Okay, so to kind of give some context to all this, and let me just caveat all of this with, it doesn't take much for people to lose faith and confidence in vaccines.
Nope.
Especially for something like the coronavirus, which is brand new, brand new. You think of how quickly these vaccines were developed. Taking such a strong measure as pulling the vaccine from, relatively small data size of actual adverse effects. Add into the fact that the prevalence of the disease is growing in Europe right now. It's not waning at all there.
Yeah, they're in the middle of a third wave.
And they're talking about even a fourth wave beyond that. And then add in again, you have these different strains that we've talked about, pretty much every episode that they're popping up. Mm-hmm. They could have continued to administer this drug while this investigation was undertaken. So you think of the time when it was kind of halted to now when it's been resumed. There's two things that have happened there. So that you've lost confidence in the actual drug itself, as well as you've probably had people who've contracted COVID in that time who could have potentially got vaccinated.
Right.
And like I said, it began in Norway, and it was off the back of 4 cases of blood clots that were reported. Now, like I said, within days, 16 countries, most notably, I would say, in terms of influence-wise, Germany, France, and Italy pulled it, shelved it, and just had stockpiles, empty vaccination centers. This is despite the WHO, the EMA, which is, European
Medicines Agency,
basically the leading agency.
Seems like that's their review board for prescriptions and vaccinations.
Right, as well as the main regulator in Britain, where the AstraZeneca vaccine has been an extreme success. Mm-hmm. They have, well over half their population have been vaccinated right now.
Yep. With a significant mix of AstraZeneca being in their a portion of those vaccines,
right?
As opposed to America, where it's Moderna and Pfizer being the 2 leading.
Yeah, those 3 main entities have all urged people to continue to use the vaccine. So as of March 18th, I think there was a total of like 30 thrombotic, or basically thrombosis, which is a blood clot.
Mm-hmm.
That's 30 people out of 5 million people. Now, when you think the instances of people who get COVID and hospitalizations, that's far less, I think, than the actual number of that. So when you talk about stats and data, which, is inherently ingrained in epidemiology and how things spread,
mm-hmm.
I think politics got in the way of the actual science of all this. And it kind of made world leaders, in this case, European leaders, take extreme measures and reactive measures to something that, has to be majoritively PR based.
Right. And extremely dependent on consistency. I mean, we saw that in America with how we waxed and waned on mask mandates. First, we were told don't buy them. They're not effective, and then it turned into, well, the healthcare workers need them more, so don't buy them, don't affect the market. Then it was like, you all need masks, go fucking sew one in your basement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, like, yeah, the every epidemiologist who talks about these things will tell you that almost just as important as the actual medicine science is the confidence.
Yeah.
Because once you roll out and craft a solution to something like a pandemic via a vaccine or treatment, whatever it may be, you need the trust in the population to actually go along with it. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, we're not China. You can't, you're not just going to like tell people you literally can't leave your house until we tell you to, and if you don't get this vaccine, you never leave your house.
Right.
We can't do that here. So there's more intricacies based around, vaccine dissemination of information and a democracy compared to more authoritarian countries who have a distinct advantage in that regard. Right.
And you think of like some of the strengths of the EU is that it kind of works, within the structure of, everybody's kind of in it together. And, in previous episodes, I talked about the danger of vaccine nationalism. Mm-hmm. I kind of have a little bit of egg on my face now because, it would have been bad for the greater good of the European countries individually. But I guess to speak about it as if you are procuring the vaccine as well as distributing it yourself and making those decisions, you'd probably be in a better shape, kind of like what Israel is, kind of like what the UK is. The EU decided to collectively, gather AstraZeneca. They shelved it for a while this was going on. And now they're far behind. I think last Sunday in Ireland, just to speak about Ireland, they've had a terrible rollout of the vaccination. Yep. I think on Sunday they only had 300 people or something. Last Sunday they only had 300 people getting jabs.
And Ireland was among those countries that
they pulled it. Yeah, yep. They pulled it. Yep. So it's just it's a bad look. And, there's one thing handling the crisis itself and handling lockdowns. And, you can argue about, how many lockdowns is enough when you talk about stifling the virus. I think the science is there to say wearing a mask and, social distance and having the most vulnerable stay out of the public eye and public purview. But all of this kind of culminates in there's still plenty of battle left to undertake here. Mm-hmm. And this as a PR kind of experiment that the EU undertook, it let the politics of everything really, bring us back a step in terms of getting us to a critical mass where people can go out and we can resume our normal lives.
Right.
And that's kind of my take on all of this. And it's unfortunate because, there's no sure vaccine out there. There's no medicine you can take where you're not going to have somebody having some sort of adverse reaction to anything. It gives fodder to the anti-vaxxers, and anybody who doesn't want to get it like grows that movement.
And even not to mention like anti-vaxxers aside, like people who are amenable to vaccines, this puts, when you have a country that has multiple different types of vaccines, like, here in America, like the Moderna vaccine it's considered like the premium, it's top shelf. Mm-hmm. As far as the efficacy numbers, experts talk about it. They've ranked them, which I think, again, was a mistake. It's a PR mistake.
Yep.
You shouldn't be doing shit like
Absolutely.
that. You should hope that you have Like, for example, compare our top 2 vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, to like Johnson & Johnson, which is volume-wise going to be our number 3 vaccine in America.
Mm-hmm.
When that got rolled out, we saw the numbers like for, some of these variants, like the South American variant, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine's very ineffective. We went through those numbers here in this country. And then the problem is, so you have people who are looking to, actively looking around. You see all these articles in the Times, WAPO, being like, oh, what should you do? Can you find excess vaccines in your area? Blah, blah, blah. People in the back of their mind are still, we turned it into a consumerist thing. That was a huge fucking misstep, in my opinion. Now, you know my take on it. I think people should be somewhat skeptical when it comes to these things, do their due diligence and make their decisions based off of that. I don't, in any regard, any aspect of politics or putting trust in government, you should always look into it for yourself. If you're concerned and you have questions, you should seek to resolve those questions yourself.
Yep.
Look into it. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying don't trust your doctor, don't trust your CDC, your World Health Organization, whoever. Sure, listen to them. They're the experts. But then back it up. So my issue here is, it's like what you've referred to before, like the spiraling nature of what this did. So so what was it? I believe it was Tuesday, right? Is when this got announced earlier in the week. And then a bunch of countries resumed very fast, like some Thursday and then a bunch more on Friday, with Norway being the outlier because that was the country that a significant amount of the thrombosis occurred in, who initially raised the alarm bell. So it's hard for them to, just hop back on. Yep. They're saying, hey, we're going to check it out for another week, do our own investigations. The issue here is like, I pulled it up here. What is it? In Thailand, which isn't a country that they don't have the ability to do the genetic sequencing themselves. So what they're doing is they're purchasing vaccines that were created in other countries. They're getting batches and they're going to bring them out, roll them out to their citizens. Which is
important and very, very good thing important. That you can do.
Right. It's good. And so the issue here was this happened. They were set to roll out, I believe it was on Thursday. They were going to get their king vaccinated on live television and roll out the AstraZeneca vaccine. And this just completely, they were like, well, we can't do it now.
Right.
But
so you wouldn't blame.
Yeah, you can't
in
blame
that
them.
Instance. You wouldn't.
That science didn't come from their country. They don't have these certain facilities and the technological capability to do a lot of the things some of these other countries do. So they rightfully paused and waited, And but that's my point. Like, look at the spiraling effect that this has. And again, even here in America, I heard some people talking about this. This wasn't breaking news really in America. It reached over here decently. They, a few articles written about it. Nothing too serious but largely that's because AstraZeneca isn't that representative in our volume of total vaccinations,
right?
Physically that we have.
The US does have a stockpile of it, but it's not. They've kind of prioritized the other ones,
right? If you look at what's been ordered and what we have, it ranks 4th. It's behind Moderna, Pfizer, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. For when you count it for total volume of ordering, like Biden just ordered another 100 million Johnson & Johnson vaccines.
I'd take any of them just note.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. Like, and the thing is, like, I'm not one of those people that's not concerned. Like, oh, I might get sick. Sure, like I know that that's a possibility, but again, I place more stock in the fact that I know that I eat pretty healthy. I take care of my body. I'm young. I'm not too worried about it.
But in terms of getting the people who are most vulnerable, and actually, if we want to go back to normal life,
right,
we want to get those that are most vulnerable and just get that critical mass.
Right.
What I will say as well is that, like, does it not show the actual privilege of these European countries, where you have countries around the world crying out for vaccines and the ability to be able to even choose a vaccine,
right,
while we're stockpiling them for a week,
right,
as the virus grows and grows,
right?
Like that's literally the definition of, like, no, we won't take that for a while. Let's
we have options.
Yeah, we have options.
Yeah. And that rolls into a part I wanted to mention on this. I didn't put it in the show notes, but I have it here in my head. I wanted to talk about Bernie Sanders actually he's trying to craft legislation in the Senate to, and he went on record in the media also. He had a conversation with Biden and his administration. He's trying to get them to remove the IP trademarks, the intellectual property trademarks, from some of the, like, Pfizer and Moderna, to allow it to be produced in other countries that have the ability. Because again, it's like what I mentioned with Thailand, folks. The thing to understand here is a lot of other countries don't have the ability to genetically sequence the virus. They can manufacture the vaccine. They have that capability. A lot of second world countries.
Yeah.
what we would, how we rank them would be considered second world countries, which is crazy because a lot of these second, third world countries actually have superior medical systems, like Cuba, for example, but we won't get into that. But so, yeah, Bernie was lobbying them, being like, hey, we should do like what in the early 20th century and what all of humanity did when vaccines first started, which was we didn't allow these companies to just wildly profit off of their intellectual property.
And hoard,
this is a world crisis. And that's, first off, the completely correct take. That should have been, and he mentioned it at the beginning of the pandemic. He was immediately shut up, because again, the healthcare lobby in our country is just
powerful,
extremely powerful. And no one wanted to play politics around that issue when we were first trying to, get the ball rolling on a vaccine in the first place.
Right.
But now that we have it going, that is a conversation that needs to be had. And again, this isn't, this is purely pitting corporatism and profit over humanism. And what the most effective route actually is, there isn't a single fucking epidemiologist who will argue against what I'm saying right now, is that if you release that IP to the world, it would be immeasurably beneficial to the overall pandemic as a whole.
Yeah.
The only reason we're not doing that is because these companies want to profit off that IP. Plain and simple. Yep. There is no other way to couch that. That is purely what it is. And don't get me wrong. I understand that, these companies put a ton of money in, blah, blah, blah. But don't forget, folks, we paid them ahead of time. They fucking made their money. And not to mention, a bunch of these companies have already said, once the pandemic, their contract that they signed with a lot of these governments, including the United States, that once the pandemic is quote unquote over, so whenever we announce that the disaster is over, they're going to fucking raise their prices. So you know what that means? That means when all these other countries that can't make their own, they're going to have to pay more. So that's whether they order them themselves or we buy them, which I would argue is even worse, because then it's going to be our tax dollars paying an upped price to send vaccines to another country when we could have just took it out of Moderna's fucking pocket in the first place and been like, no, you made enough. We're going to legalize your IP. We're going to publicize your IP now.
Right. And to make it that more difficult is you have, governments, and I can only speak to what I'm seeing in Ireland, is you have governments trying to say, we need to do better as people to make sure we're distancing, keeping diligent. But at the same time, they're completely mismanaging the rollout of the vaccine that would help people get back to that quicker. So you can only say that for so long to people. Right. And people are growing increasingly fucking agitated.
And anxious
about it all.
You're only going to get so many months of compliance with this type of stuff.
Yeah.
All these pandemic experts, people go to school for this shit and study it. It's because a lot of it's sociological. It's not even just science or a hard science like medicine. A lot of this has sociological implications. You're only going to get so much buy-in for so long. France is having wild issues with it. They've been having giant which we all know France will fucking protest at the drop of a hat. But for example, Macron, he announced, mind you, they're one of the countries that shelved AstraZeneca. At the same time, days after he shelved it, he announced a new round of extreme lockdowns in the Paris region, which is one of their most highly populated areas in the country.
Right.
So not only are you saying, oh, by the way, this vaccine, we're unsure of it, we're going to study it. You're undermining public confidence in that regard. But then 2 days later, you're going to be like, oh, by the way, you all have to be in your home by 6 o'clock or you're fucking arrested.
Yeah.
This is not it's just, and I get it. And we can get into the conversation of just analyzing the PR effect of what we talked about offline in pre-production for the show. You have the scientists all the way on the right doing the hard science, and you have the people in the middle who are sort of the intermediaries that know the science but are more PR affiliated, where their job is to go out in the media and explain the science. They're not actually doing the research. And then you have the politicians on the left. There has to be some better marrying.
Not politically speaking, left or right either. Just
right. I'm just saying, imagine it in your mind. Where people in a room could be situated. Right. There has to be some better marrying between these three factions that are supposed to be working hand in hand. And the thing is, for the politicians, I have some sympathy because it's you have had all these issues. Other countries, it's not really that well covered in America. But if you look at it, there's been just as much skepticism, protests, people fighting against lockdown measures, because don't forget, folks, we've actually had it pretty easy in America. A ton of states never really went into full lock. There's states that haven't had school stopped.
Ireland is still in full lockdown that you can't leave within 5 kilometers of your home still, I want to say. So
there's schools that never stopped in America. A lot of people don't know this. We never had curfews here in New York.
No.
We never had any shit like that. It was just, hey, wear a mask. And people got pissed at that. Now, so imagine people in European countries being in regions that have high infection rates and being told, fuck you, you can't go outside after 6 for almost a year.
Yeah.
You know, and they've been lifted intermittently in between, but it's like,
we're
imagine
protesting masks over here.
Yeah, imagine the psychological effect of being told on a Tuesday, like, oh, by the way, this vaccine might fucking smoke you. And then 2 days later, by the way, yeah, you're locked down. Good luck, bucko.
Not to mention, like, add in the fact now that more and more strains are being identified. So we're only talking about these vaccines and their efficacy with, you know, the majority of that data was taken probably from, you know, when they started, let's say in May to December, the efficacy around the wild strain is what they're calling it. Now, these offshoots and like any virus, like the flu virus, every flu shot you get each year is a different type of flu shot.
Right.
And it's to speak to the actual strain of flu that's there, because
they're trying to guess at the parameters of which they put several strains.
Exactly. And luckily, like, if you delve into the science of it, the makers of these, you know, I can only speak to, I guess, the Pfizer, the husband and wife couple who came out and actually made the Pfizer vaccine. They speak to how it's standing up well against these different strains, but we don't know how many more strains are going to come. And add that into the mix of people's already apprehension and anxiety around the vaccination process, whether they're going to get it, what vaccine they're going to get, how effective is that going to be. And it just adds to, you know, just the overall mess of it all. And, you know, a lot of it lies on, I guess, the EU and their health arm. But then also, obviously, the individual countries, it was their call on whether they were going to pull it or not. It's just it's a bit of a nightmare. Hopefully, you know, the need and want for people to just get the vaccine and be able to, you know, I know that more and more now, I want to say is it in America? They just came out, the CDC said that if 2 people have been vaccinated, they can now meet indoors without masks. Yeah.
They've been changing a ton of guidance. They announced that. They said, like, you know, for example, like, you know, elementary school kids can be reduced to 3 feet instead of 6 feet social distancing. And, you know, I read through some of they weren't really studies. They were kind of just like analysis of what the current data was and what they think is like acceptable as far as infection rates.
I know Britain are saying that they're going to administer EU vaccination passports if you've been vaccinated,
right, which is a whole other ball of yarn, and that's a wild issue.
That is, and I can understand that more for international travel, but within a single country, it doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it's just interesting, right? Because like all the criticism the West launches, you know, America, the UK against China, and it's like, well, you're just doing what they did. That's what they did. They did that a long time ago, and you all criticized the fuck out of it. And now you're like, oh, we're going to do vaccine passports.
Right.
There's been murmurings of it in the United States. Whether, you know, they want to adopt some policy of like, oh, can you ride public transportation if you're not, you know, all these things where, I mean, we still have, I feel really bad honestly, for the people who aren't like, you know, I've been paying attention to this myself, not because of like, you know, oh, I'm worried about it. Right? Like, I find it fascinating to just, again, observe and see like how all these different aspects of power are involving themselves with this wild issue, this insurmountable issue. It's fascinating, really. But I feel really bad for the people who are just kind of like trying to live their lives, don't really have a ton of time to sit and think about this shit. And then like, you know, you're hearing all this crazy stuff about like, oh, you're not going to be able to like ride the bus or go like to school, or, you know, if you're not vaccinated. And it's like, you have all these people and then at the same time they're being told like, oh, well, you're not in the cohort to get vaccinated yet.
Right.
So in their mind, it's like an anxiety ridden thing where it's like, oh, time's ticking. When am I going to be able to get, you know, even if they want to, which a ton of people,
right.
If you look at the data, lower income folks who are probably the ones riding public transportation and shit like that, they don't have the very high buy-in anyway to begin with.
Well,
so we're going to have like people who think this shit is like, oh, we made a vaccine, there's a decent rollout, it's over. if you're not considering like the level of variance, the steep drop off of buy-in that's going to come once you get this initial batch of people in America, like this first like 5 months of vaccine rollout of people who really want the vaccine, especially like old folks who are wildly represented in the number of people who've gotten vaccines so far in America, we're going to hit a steep cliff here and start having a whole nother round of new fucking problems around vaccine passports, buy-in, trust in the government, efficacy rates of these mRNA versus non-mRNA vaccines for new strains that are going to keep being more and more proliferated in America as time goes on here. So I feel bad.
And also you have the dynamic of those who are prioritized for a vaccine, right? Older people, people with comorbidities, and then young people, which adds the dynamic then of young people are far more probably chomping at the bit. Young, healthy people, and when I say young, I'm not trying to like categorize them as, you know, people my age. I'm talking about all the way up to like 50, 60, even 70 at times.
People that aren't at risk.
Yeah, people that aren't at risk. That adds the whole mental health aspect of those people who are chomping a bit to get back to normal life, where those who had been prioritized, or those, you know, who are at risk or in nursing homes or things like that, who are content now. They have the vaccine. They're not chomping at the bit to get outside and go back to normal, because there was a level of mundanity to that, what they were doing anyway inside these facilities. Young people, as the weather gets, you know, the need to want to get outside, you know, social. It's been over a year.
Florida's been popping for a month now.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing. You're looking at these other places as they open up, whether right or wrong.
Right.
That adds, from a mental health standpoint, that adds another level to, you know, you feeling isolated. And, you know, it's tough. It's tough on many levels. You know, I know Paddy's Day just happened, you know, this week. You know, I had a few people out the back, but I would have loved nothing more than to be able to, like, you know, go meet someone anywhere else, or, you know, just have as many people as I wanted.
Right.
You have people who are only seeing their grandparents for the first time in months, nearly a year. You have people who are dying, who were told they couldn't, you know, that potentially people can't come to their funeral. They can't bury your family with dignity. All of this compiles to, you know, this issue. And, you know, we could do a segment every week on COVID. But, like, at the end of the day, looking back on this, when Millie, my daughter, is reading about this in her, you know, history books in the future, and her kids are reading about it in the history books, there'll be so many moments where it'll be mismanaged, you know, where they'll be able to highlight where it's been mismanaged and where there was, you know, mistakes along
you're being
the
a
way.
little too gratuitous. If she's going to be in America still, that's going to get whitewashed like a motherfucker. No.
We did it so good.
No. They're not going to mention any. They're just going to be like, oh, this many people died. But America, they rolled out the vaccine fast.
Yeah.
They're not going to give
credit where it's due.
They're not going to give any context to the immiseration of a fucking year that the entire population went through, anxiety ridden with this shit. They're not going to do
credit
that.
where it's due, though. I think that, you know, Biden set out with the goal of getting X amount of people. What was it, like 100
million shots in 100 days? Yeah.
Yeah, and he's well ahead of that.
Yeah.
I think there's been some good negotiating on getting more vaccine available, which is only going to help the world.
Right.
Because I think they're open to sending vaccines to other countries. And, you know, when we talk about a virus doesn't have any political affiliation. It doesn't care where you're from, what color you are, you know, what way you piss, what bathroom you go into. It doesn't matter. You know, it's going to stop you from traveling. It'll travel. It's going to stop you from traveling if it continues to be a problem. And your quality of life for everybody, if this continues to ravage and, you know, go everywhere and get out of control. And that's why it annoys me so much with these people who are, like, for example, Texas. Obviously, used to live there. I have plenty of friends still there. You know, people I consider family there. The idea for them to just open up, even though, you know, inoculations are starting to ramp up and actually get to a point where we can be optimistic about it all, blows my mind. People, you know, protesting the lockdowns when we're already nearly at the other side of it. you're actually bringing people backwards by doing shit like that. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
And not to get into that aspect of it. I mean, we're talking about the AstraZeneca thing, but
there's definitely a correlation between, because like when you compare like the EU bloc to America, we have that same thing happening here. Like these states are basically indistinct from the national government. It is a perfect comparison because like Florida and Texas are like, they're doing their own fucking thing.
Very true.
They're doing their own fucking thing. They're not, doing what CDC says should be done in a ton of regards. And you know what? That's part of like, that's one minorly, like if it wasn't run by like these fucking hogs, like it would be more endearing to me because I do like that. I do like how we have the flexibility in our system to like, okay, this isn't as much of a problem here. Like perfect example, like West Virginia, they had a great vaccine rollout. They're probably going to be one of the first states that can return to normalcy with the science.
Well, they approached it. They did the rural communities first, was it? And
exactly. They went out in. Which was one of the. I saw a bunch of different breakdowns on like what the strategies would be, and I mean, first off, they had a huge advantage because just like the per capita basis of like how close people live to each other, like per foot.
Think of concentration.
They don't have a wild concentration of people living all together, which is obviously what proliferates the virus, but. Again, like the way that they rolled it out, it was something unique where, people wouldn't expect that of one of the poorest states in the country. You know what I mean? But again, it's that level of they have the community there. You know what I mean? So there's different aspects to this. Just like how we compared, like when we talk about like the UK, compare the UK and France, both wildly wealthy countries. But look at the politics of the two different countries and look at the disparity in what they're seeing right now in vaccine rollout and lockdowns and stuff like that. Like the UK went into these lockdowns hard, fast, and early. France tried to play on the edges a little bit, just like what you're saying with like Florida and Texas. Like I read an article just yesterday researching for this, like Macron was gambling. He was trying to be like, you know what, let's see, I want 6% growth this year because he's got an election coming up. And he had to go back into a hard lockdown. He rolled those dice. The UK didn't do that. They locked people down and said, sorry, no Christmas.
Right.
You know what I mean? They took those punches on the chin ahead of time to try to have a better future. And a lot of European countries did go along in that fashion. A ton of people followed Britain in that regard. But, again, it's just like what we said with the Cuomo thing. You have all this pressure from your civilian population to do what they want. You got the medical experts telling you one other thing and trying to balance those. It's fucking impossible, man.
Right.
But it didn't help with this whole AstraZeneca thing where it's like, it's like what we were saying offline. I was making the argument to you, like, this is like the one scenario where it's like, you couldn't have waited a minute. You could have just did the investigation instead of like announcing this giant fucking like made a huge deal out of like, oh, we're just a bunch of people died. We're going to stop using this one.
Yeah. And
that forever is going to leave a mark on that vaccine, which again, if people have choices, that's not even bottom shelf anymore. That's a lot of people are going to consider that as, well, that's a fucking hot shot. I'm not taking that shit.
And I'll confidently argue that even though it was only a week, the amount of people who will die from contracting COVID in that week when they probably could have got a vaccine will be more than the actual risk of them dying from taking the vaccine.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's kind of the big picture of all of this, right? Is the politics allowed that to supersede the actual science and data behind the efficacy and dangers of taking a vaccine.
Right. And then that's this thing, like on the other side of that coin, I totally do have a ton of respect and understanding for why, like if I put myself in those shoes, if I was the fucking president of a country and I read some concerning shit like that, like, I don't know, like I would have been at home sitting there drinking a whiskey, like, fuck, what do I do? You know what I mean? Like that is a literal, like, be Macron for a second. Like, what the fuck do? You want to be, if you're an actual person who cares about people, and you're thinking like, man, what if I do roll this out and a ton of my people die?
Yeah, but
because the thing is, what we have to remember too is like the political, like the life cycle of these stories and stuff is so short and extreme now.
Yeah.
With like, again, France's example, like all those heavy lockdowns, all this stuff, like you're being like hyper scrutinized by not only by your population, but by the media, all these things. Like, we're on such a short-term news cycle now where these things, you will get fucking but you will get fucking crucified like the next week when people come out and say, oh, he fucked up. This was the wrong choice. And this has been happening to them for a year now.
And the flip side of that, though, is what I'll say is you have the leading health organization, the WHO. You have the regional health organization, the EMA, as well as the proof in the pudding with the English and the UK rollout, saying don't stop it, right? At some point, you have to put it on the individual. You at home sipping on the whiskey, wondering, do you want to take that or not?
Right.
Yeah, maybe so, maybe not. But by stopping a rollout, you're stopping that individual then having the opportunity to go and get it.
Yeah, you're halting the infrastructure.
So do your due diligence in between that point A and point B while continuing to give those, because you have the evidence, you have the clinical trials, you have the backup of the leading health organizations and science organizations backing you up. So yeah, there is a little bit of that, tussle within, you as a world leader or you as an organization deciding whether, hopefully this doesn't go south. But if you can ever make a decision based on fact and data and science, it's right there. And that's where it really annoyed me.
Right.
Is because you should never have done that.
Sure. No, I agree. I just, like I said, I didn't want to, be super critical without at least observing the others. Like, I understand it.
Right.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Same way I gave Cuomo the caveat. Like,
yeah,
this is fucking, it's difficult shit, man. Like, aside, there isn't really anything that comparable for, decisions world leaders have had to make. A sense, like, I would argue, like World War II. Right. This is like huge shit that people are having to decide on, and, trying to balance hearing the cries of and concerns of your actual constituents versus science. Because, and that's the thing, that's this fucked up place that we've been put in where, you have such an undermine. It's not even just about like medical institutions or like vaccines or whatever. It's just a general distrust of government in this world that we live in right now. And it's not unique to America. It's the whole world.
Right.
And this is honestly, this is the chicken coming home to roost of decades and decades of just fucked up shit on the global stage and people being turning cynical from it. That's honestly like the biggest thing when people ask me about like anti-vaxxer sentiment and stuff like that. It's like, well, how? It's not that surprising. Like people ask like, oh, where do conspiracies come from or anti-vaxxers, all this. It's like, it's all a culminating thing. Like we have the internet now. We have the ability to communicate freely and express ideas and expose the truths of lies from the past from our own government and every other one around the world. And then people wonder why, like, oh, well, why won't they just do like what Dr. Fauci said? And it's like, well, that's why, dude. That is why. It's not, you can't expect everyone to operate at a level of like intellectual honesty around a singular subject when all the other historical applications of what their country has done still apply.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's hard to separate those two things.
I think
it really is.
I think to end it on an optimistic standpoint, I think by all of this happening, kind of everything that we talk about, right? Issue wise, topic wise, by these things happening and it not just being part of that 24-hour news cycle, it allows countries then to look forward to be more prepared. And I think, I have a lot of optimism around this next generation coming. They lived, we are now living through like a global crisis or what it seems like a monumental crisis every few months with different things, whether it be like the biggest protests we've ever seen or, a virus we haven't seen in 100+ years or, name your fucking topic. I'm hoping that what this is doing is it's making people more aware that, you can be, laissez-faire and kind of brush off the idea of being involved in politics. And I think what has happened and what has continued to happen since the advent of politicians is that people have been kind of disenfranchised with actually feeling like they have a voice and they can change things. With the advent of internet and people being able to communicate, across the globe, it's allowing people to get together on ideas, whether good or bad, but at least have that discussion and then kind of shape what they want to do, whether you want to run for government, whether you want to, start organizations, all these different things. I think the unveiling of everything allows that to take place and people actually talk on ideas. And, politicians aside, I think every single thing that you do, whether it be you're a farmer or you're, a Silicon Valley mogul, everything you do is being manipulated by the choices and the legislator or whatever it is that is around there. So whether you like it or not, you need to be aware of, what your vote means, who you're voting for, and, the greater, I would say, the greater implications of the people that are in office. So when we talk about AstraZeneca, when we talk about, the EU, when we talk about Cuomo, you can no longer be, just brush off the idea of being politically involved. And that, all I mean by politically involved is knowing who's running, holding them accountable, know who your local officials and legislative branch is. Then, that's all I'll say. And, we get into kind of some heavy shit, and the majority of the time we're talking about stuff that is kind of going wrong, right? Mm-hmm. But that's only to highlight the need for us to be involved and to highlight these things in order so we can get it right. What does they say? You win or you learn, right?
Right.
So, we've gotten into some good stuff. I enjoyed the conversation here, and I'd advise anybody, if this is our 7th episode, we've been talking about a lot of these issues that have been coming up, and we've talked about them in their early days, and we've been seeing them, growing, and I think we've hit the mark with a few of them as they grew. So I would say go back and listen to some of the episodes. We appreciate the support. I'm feeling happy. It's sunny outside. I might get outside and get a bit of vitamin D.
Oh yeah.
So I appreciate it. Thanks very much, guys. Any parting words, Ramon?
No, that's it. Thanks everybody for listening, and stay tuned for the next and any updates coming during the week from the anchor.fm page and the Facebook page.
Yeah, please show your support on those. Sorry, that Heineken has hit me a little bit now. Peace.
Later.